All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're tackling a really core concept in criminal law, one that answers a huge question. How can the exact same crime get punished in wildly different ways? Well, the answer comes down to two words: aggravating circumstances. I mean, you've probably thought about this, right? Why does one person who commits theft get a light sentence, while someone else gets years for what seems like the same offense? It's because the law looks so much deeper than just the act itself. It asks how it was done, why it was done, where it happened, and who did it. Those details, they change everything.
And those details, in legal terms, are what we call aggravating circumstances. Think of them as factors that dial up the severity of a crime and, naturally, its punishment. The whole idea, and this is a phrase pulled right from legal doctrine, is that they show a greater perversity from the offender. It's basically the law's way of saying, yeah, what you did was bad, but the way you did it was so much worse.
So, how exactly does the law figure this out? Here's our roadmap. We're going to break it down into three main areas. First, we'll look at the offender's status. Then, we'll dive into the methods they used. After that, we'll examine the context of the crime. And finally, we'll see how the courts put it all together for the final calculation. Okay, let's jump into our first big category. This one is all about the offender themselves. Because sometimes a person's job, their criminal history, or even their state of mind can make their crime carry a heavier weight in the eyes of the law. You know, some of these are pretty common sense, right? If you're a repeat offender, a recidivist, as they say in the legal world, that's obviously going to make things worse. Same goes for planning a crime out beforehand or betraying someone's trust. But let's zoom in on one that's especially serious: taking advantage of a public position. And the logic here is crystal clear. When someone in a position of public trust, like a police officer or a politician, uses that power to commit a crime, it's more than just a crime. It's a fundamental betrayal. They're weaponizing the authority we, the people, gave them, and that makes the offense just so much more serious. Here's a perfect real-world case to show you what I mean. In a case called People versus Tarita, a town councilor was going around collecting fake fines from people. The court basically said, look, the only reason this scam worked was because he was a counselor. People trusted the title. He used his office as a weapon. And that's precisely what this aggravating circumstance is all about. All right, so that's the who. Now let's move on to the how. We're talking about the specific means or methods a person uses to commit a crime, because how you do something can reveal a level of cruelty or planning that the law absolutely punishes more harshly. So, the law has a list of specific methods it looks out for. Using a disguise shows deception. Taking advantage of being way stronger than your victim, that's seen as cowardly. But let's really dig into two of the heaviest hitters here: treachery and cruelty. Treachery, or alevosía as it's known in some legal systems, is a very specific thing. It's not just a surprise attack. No, it means the attacker picked a method specifically to make sure their crime would succeed and, this is the crucial part, to eliminate any possible risk to themselves. It's an attack where the victim has zero chance to fight back. So, for a court to say treachery was involved, they have to check two boxes. First, did the method itself actually make the victim defenseless? And second, did the attacker knowingly and deliberately choose that method for that exact reason? It's all about that cold, calculated choice to make someone completely helpless. Now, cruelty is a little different. This isn't just about a crime being violent or messy. Legal cruelty is when the offender deliberately and inhumanely piles on extra suffering. It's when they go way beyond what's needed to commit the crime just for the sake of inflicting more pain. A truly chilling example of this comes from the historical case of U.S. versus Oro. In that case, an infant was killed by having its mouth burned. The court's reasoning was just devastatingly logical. They said if the only goal was to kill, there were countless other ways to do it. The method chosen here showed a clear, undeniable intent to cause unimaginable, unnecessary suffering. And that right there is the very definition of legal cruelty. Next up, let's talk about context, because the where and the when of a crime really matter. The law understands that certain times and places can make a criminal act a much deeper violation of our safety and social order. For instance, committing a crime during something like an earthquake or a flood, that's seen as taking advantage of total chaos and vulnerability. The same idea applies to where a crime happens. A person's home, their dwelling, is supposed to be their sanctuary. Violating that space makes any crime feel so much worse. And, of course, using the cover of darkness is a classic aggravating factor.
But here's the catch with nighttime. It's not automatic. A crime happening at 2 a.m. isn't automatically worse. The prosecution has to actually prove that the offender chose to act at night specifically to make the crime easier or to make it easier to get away with. It all comes back to intent. Okay, so we've got the offender's status, the method they used, and the context of the crime. Now for the big question. How do courts take all these pieces and turn them into an actual sentence? Well, this is where a little bit of legal math comes into play.
First, and this is maybe the most important distinction we'll make today, there are two kinds of aggravating circumstances. Most are generic. They just take the penalty for a crime and bump it up to a higher level. But then there are qualifying circumstances. These are so serious they literally change the name of the crime. For example, a killing is homicide, but a killing committed with treachery, that's not homicide anymore. It gets elevated to the much more serious crime of murder. So after the court figures out the exact crime, they have a penalty range, usually split into minimum, medium, and maximum periods. This table gives you the basic rules of thumb. If there are no special circumstances either way, you land in the medium period. If there are only mitigating circumstances, things that lessen the crime, you're in the minimum period. And as you'd guess, if there are only aggravating ones, you're looking at the maximum period. And if there are both, well, they cancel each other out one for one, and whatever's left over tells the court which rule to apply.
So, when you boil it all down, aggravating circumstances are really just the law's toolkit for measuring the moral weight of a crime. It's how the justice system tries to look past the surface-level facts and tailor a punishment that fits not just the crime, but the specific and sometimes horrific details of how it was committed.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. By building a system that relies so much on interpreting things like motive, context, and method, the law is trying to create a more nuanced, a more tailored sense of justice. But does this incredibly detailed calculation actually get us closer to fairness? Or does it, maybe, introduce a level of human judgment that makes a truly objective punishment impossible? It's definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.